We often have events for books that are about interesting topics, but not necessarily important ones. This is not one of those books. Linda Wertheimer is a longtime journalist, was education editor of the Globe. She teaches writing at Grove Street and journalism at BU. She traveled all over the country researching this book, and the result is, I would say, an at least somewhat optimistic outlook that argues that there is a way to navigate this issue, and that we can actually raise children who learn about religion in public schools in a way that is constructive, positive, and ultimately beneficial to our society as a whole. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our friend, Linda Wertheimer.
As David was saying, this book actually could be a shocker to many people, because when studies have been done about this, it turns out most people don't even know that we can teach about religion in the public school. There are only a little over a third who know that we can offer a comparative religion course. I found that a little bit shocking, given many people actually learn about religion in school. Interestingly, 90% do know that teachers no longer can lead people in prayer in the classroom, and yet 10% don't know that. And then the last one, only a quarter of people surveyed knew that we could read from the Bible as an example of literature, and yet that's always been legal. So I just wanted to share that. And then the other thing that I found really interesting is that we just don't know that much about religion. And I'll be honest that I learned a whole bunch about world religions along the way sitting in these classrooms. When given a quiz, Americans only got half of the questions correct. Now I will say when I did this quiz, a partial quiz on my Facebook page, most people got it right. But I think it might have been a little rigged given that included religion scholars and my editor and many others who are familiar with religion. But out there, people generally don't know. So I thought I would show you a few of the questions. Only 47% got this particular question right. Which religion is the Dalai Lama? Does everybody, I don't want to embarrass anybody. I know that a lot of you know, but does anybody want to throw out a guess? What? Buddhist, yes. And as you saw, a lot of people don't know that. Fewer than 4 in 10 Americans know that Vishnu and Shiva are associated with what religion? Hindu. Yes. Well, I think that the audience here is a little more knowledgeable than many. And then this one, I'm not going to ask you the question. I just wanted to emphasize this because it came up when I was going to the classrooms. They work very hard to teach the students where Muslims live, because the common stereotype is they all live in the Middle East or they all live in Saudi Arabia, and that's actually not true. And what the study found is only a quarter know that most people in Indonesia are Muslim, and in fact that country has a larger Muslim population than any other country. So that's sort of a nice statistic. So why write faith ed? I'm an education writer. I wasn't a religion writer. And so part of this comes from a very personal story. When I was 9 years old, my family moved from Western New York State to Ohio. And in Western New York State, there were a few Jewish temples, and there was at least a Jewish community. Where we moved to in this small town in Ohio, Jews just didn't live there. I think the closest temple was about an hour away. And the very first week of class, I mean, if you look over here at this right here, it's a flannel graph. And I don't know if you can all see it, but that is Jesus and his disciples. And a woman came into my classroom and she taught us Bible stories using that and had us sing Jesus Loves Me, and I was Jewish. I'm going to not tell you anymore because I wanted to read you a little bit from the chapter in my book called The Church Lady. And as you can guess, 1974 was a long time ago for me as I put on my reading glasses. The church lady was the symbol of so much of my childhood angst. Dorothy Powell, though, had no idea of any of that. I'm going to clue you in on why I'm mentioning her name. I never knew her name the whole time. I saw her once. And then when I started working on this book, I decided to go back to Ohio and track her down, and I found her, and she agreed to let me interview her. And I'm going to read a little bit more, but one thing I will say is this is what she now looks like. And she's a grandmother of 9, and she's a nice lady. But here I will read this part to you. As we talked, Powell and I sat across from each other in a classroom at Good Hope Lutheran Church in Arlington before her classes started for the day. Through the window, I could see the brick front of the Arlington School building. I asked if she ever thought about the children who were excused from her class over the years. Some of them were of a faith that didn't want anyone else to teach them differently, she said. How did you feel about them? They weren't treated badly, she said, her voice retaining the gentle tone she used from the moment we met. How do you know? I asked. Just supposed to close that off. Well, I don't know, she said. I'm going to tell you a little story, okay, I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. It felt as if I were about to give a confession. I rambled on about how I was Jewish, and my family had moved to Van Buren from upstate New York. I didn't know what I expected as I told her how I felt the day she came into my classroom. Now imagine, I said, I'm Jewish. We do not believe in Jesus. We are not Christians. And there she was, this lady in a skirt with a felt board and felt figures telling all of us to sing Jesus Loves Me. And I sat there in that room, and you know what I wanted to do? I said, my voice still shaky, sink down to the floor as low as I possibly could. She seemed at a loss as she searched for a response. At first she just said, oh. Then she recalled how there was a Jewish boy who loved the class until she started teaching about the New Testament. She asked me if any of the children made fun of me because I was Jewish. I responded that they did, from 1974 to 1982. The whole time I was at Van Buren. Really, she asked? I nodded, but afterward I wish I had amplified. It wasn't as if every student accosted me about my religion. I had had friends through playing flute in the band, competing on the basketball team, running track, working on the yearbook. I'll stop there. Sorry, I was not an overachiever, I promise. But the church lady's visit to my classroom singled me out in front of peers. And some never forgot that I was different in a school with no visible diversity. Powell told me she was sorry I'd experienced that, yet she did not link what had happened to her presence in the school. I'm going to fast forward in this chapter. I sat there and I watched her teach 2 classes. She no longer teaches inside the school. They finally realized, yeah, that's illegal. So now they teach in classrooms in churches next to the school, and that is legal, as long as you do it outside of the school. But the kids do leave the school, walk across to the church, and there's still kids left behind. So we can talk about that later, but I think there might be something wrong with that picture. After the second class, I got up to leave and Powell walked over. She said she was thinking about our earlier conversation and wanted me to know she was sorry that other children had treated me badly. She told me she makes a point to tell her students that Jews are God's chosen people when the class talks about the Old Testament. Good Christians, she said, looked at Judaism as the beginning of Christianity. I smiled and nodded, unsure of how to respond. I never wanted my peers in elementary school to look at me as if I were one of God's chosen people. I wanted them to see me as one of them, not an other. I asked Powell what she thought of a public school class about different religions and described what I saw in the 6th grade class in Wellesley, Massachusetts. She said she wouldn't object to such a high school course, but wasn't sure about middle school. It would depend on the 6th graders' maturity. I think it would be good if kids could learn about other religions, I said. She paused. Well, yes, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the Muslims. The Jews, they came to this country and they didn't try to change things. They sort of did their own thing. The Muslims, I think they're trying to change what other people do. So let me get back up there. You can look at her for a second. So teach versus preach. There's this tug of war that plays across our country. You still have many people like Mrs. Powell who are sort of torn. If she had her way, she would still be doing these classrooms inside the school. So would her organization. So would many people that I talk to. And I want to, as a little backdrop, I want to show you what is still happening before I show you what's happening on the positive end. So this is actually in Quincy, not Kuntz that I kept trying to say, but I think it's pronounced Quincy, Texas. I don't know if anyone here is from Texas. Did I get it right, Michael?
You were right on the button.
Quincy, and it is east of Houston. It's just a tiny little town. And they are all about football and all about religion. But interestingly, one thing I found about this town, at one point they had a Muslim mayor, and yet this is going on. They have these prayer banners, and the cheerleaders create banners with sayings from primarily the New Testament, and then the football team runs through them. And so I had to see it for myself, and this is a picture from there. And there has been battles over it, and so far the cheerleaders are winning. And this is called See You at the Pole, and it's in Lumberton, Texas, but it's not just in Lumberton, Texas. I don't know how much you can see from there, but everyone's praying, and it is a before-school activity. And what I found interesting when I went to see it is there are a lot of adults in that picture. There are teachers there. There are, administrative assistants. Yes, it's before school, but what message does that send? And then there's students who have every right to be there who are members of the Christian clubs. And it was a lovely service led by adults, primarily, who are youth pastors at a Baptist church there. And one thing I will add about this is not just Lumberton, Texas. This is done, Sherry, I see you nodding. Is it done in Modesto? Yeah. Anybody else ever familiar with this in other communities? It's Georgia, Kansas, Ohio, I guess what we would consider the Bible Belt states of our country. Perfectly legal, but this has only been going on since the 1990s. And then finally, I'll take you back to my alma mater. This was actually on a board in March, Merry Christmas from God's Nights, and that is it's the religious club legal, created by students, actually in memory of a student. I attended a meeting and they were lovely, lovely, lovely kids. The problem is that they invited the principal to read scripture and he did. So you still have a lot of stuff going on in the backdrop. And then you have teachers trying to teach about the world's religions in a lot of these same communities. So there's a tension still very much going on in our country. And I want to get to now what really is the meat of the book, which is teaching about religion. We know preaching is illegal. I don't think anyone in the room would disagree with that. But teaching about religion is definitely legal, and as David said, it's kind of an imperative that we do it. And what I'd like to do is take you to some of the classrooms, starting with Lumberton, Texas. Sharon Peters reached into a hot pink cloth bag and pulled out an abaya, a full-length body garment for women from Kuwait. As if she were modeling for a fashion show, the world geography teacher stuck her arms out sideways and held the garment against her to show how far it stretched. From the tips of the fingers on one hand to those on the other. She slipped her arms through, letting the black polyester cloth hang loosely from her shoulders to her moccasin-clad feet. She apologized for her inauthenticity. Normally, she would wear sandals. Next, she held a black filmy veil to her face, then repeated what she always said to her freshman advanced geography students in Lumberton, a dot of a town 100 miles east of Houston, near the Louisiana border. I want you to put it in front of your face so you can see how others in the world live, she said. Imagine, she added in her native Southeast Texas twang, what it would be like to see the world through gauze. Like a magician about to unveil the next trick, she reached into the bag again and clutched a royal blue burqa from Afghanistan, a garment that conceals the wearer from head to toe and includes mesh over the eyes. This was the item, she said, that caused our famous burqa incident. Okay, if there's young children, don't listen. Her previously gentle tone turned stern. This is the only damn burqa. Okay. It was the fall of September 2013, and Peters was giving me an impromptu fashion show in the living room of her one-story ranch home in Lumberton. She didn't try on the burqa because it was child-sized, okay for a very short teen, but not for an adult who was about 5 feet 6 inches tall. She relived the day she'd given her customary lesson, which for nearly 15 years had been part of her instruction about Islam and the Middle East. During her February 1st, 2013 class, as always, students took photos of one another. But this time, a student posted a photo on Facebook of 4 girls and 1 boy wearing the outfits, including the burqa. You can probably guess what happened next. The picture went viral, causing an uproar that some teachers dubbed Burqa-gate. For several weeks, it was as if Peters' entire 39-year teaching career was under attack. Strangers sent emails accusing her and the school system of corrupting children and attempting to convert them to Islam. Already 63, Peters had been thinking of retiring at the end of that school year. The controversy sealed the decision. And she is now retired and working, FYI, a little postscript. She's started a home health aid business. And she still lives in Lumberton because her grandchildren are there. Okay. So now I want to take you someplace local, Wellesley, not far from us. And some of you may, this is really the second impetus for the book. Some of you may remember or may not, this was like 4 or 5 years ago, I did a Globe magazine cover story about Wellesley Middle School taking a field trip to a mosque. And then a big controversy came about over that. There was a mistake that happened. Some of the boys actually participated in prayer, but it was caught on video. And the video that came out said Wellesley students learned to pray to Allah. The school got hate mail. The superintendent said they got some death threats. It was very, very, very nasty. And yes, I was intrigued by that controversy, but even more so, I was amazed to learn what they do with the 6th graders in Wellesley. They spend 4 weeks studying Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And then they spend 3 more weeks learning about Hinduism. And they allow discussion, they go on field trips, they have guest speakers. So it's really quite interesting. I don't know if you can see this, it's hard to see in this picture. There's a man in the orange, way in the back, standing in the concave area. I believe that's called the mihrab. And I want to read something from the chapter Wellesley because I think it kind of captures why we should teach about religion. Adam Bloomer knew teaching about religion could lead to controversy, even in a liberal town and a state considered among the most secular in the country. He created a 2-page letter for teachers to send home to parents before the religions unit began. In that letter, he addressed 2 questions. Why teach about religion at all? Why teach about it in middle school? He listed several reasons, including religion's role in culture and its attempt to explain the unexplainable, as well as the school system's goal to teach students respect for human differences. And why middle school? Because that's often when children are wrestling with the kinds of questions religion addresses. Who am I? How am I unique? How am I part of a larger community? How do good people act? What is bad? Why do seemingly unexplainable things happen? He gave parents a heads up about the plan for field trips, describing the excursions as one of the greatest gifts we can give to students. And another postscript about this. This is not from the controversial field trip in 2010. I just wanted to amplify in this. They still go to mosque every year. They go to the Wayland Mosque. And the difference between what they did before and what they do now, there's no active prayer going on. So they feel like there's no risk of something going wrong. And what's going on in here is their guides have just given a PowerPoint presentation about Islam. And there's a picture over there of Mecca. And Seppi Jelani, who was the guide, and I see a smile back there, I think someone must know Seppi. She talked about when her family took a trip to the Hajj. And so she just made the lesson more personal. This is what it was like when we went. So I'll show you that picture. I want to take you to Wellesley even a little bit deeper and into the classroom. This is Jonathan Rabinowitz, and I spent several months with his classroom. This is just him teaching his classroom, and this is a little passage from the book. I wanted to try to put you in the classroom a little bit. All the way throughout the religions class, Rabinowitz nudged students to discern what was alike and different among the religions. Toward the end of the Christianity unit, he handed out worksheets with a Venn diagram. One circle was labeled Judaism, the other Christianity. The overlap was labeled both. He gave students a worksheet of 44 statements about the religions and urged them to work in groups. Celia, who you'll learn about when you read the book, and her classmates huddled at sets of 4 desks and loud chatter filled the room. Believed that Jesus was Jewish. Students easily got that one. Both Jews and Christians believe that, they said. And they sorted out that baptism was a Christian ritual only. Another question about kneeling during services tripped up some students. I don't kneel during services, said a girl who was Christian. But some Christians do, countered a boy who was Hindu. Maybe, the girl said, the answer was both for kneeling. Rabinowitz announced 12 minutes, 7 seconds to get all 44 of these in the right place. Debates at the tables continued until the teacher said loudly, 1 minute, 12 seconds. Then a few students clustered around him, begging for hints to the trickier statements. I'm not telling you, the teacher said with a smile and shooed them away. I want them to debate, he told me in an aside. The hard thing is, kids want right versus wrong. There isn't always a right. So I wanted to show you that because Wellesley really attempts to show the layers. This is not a black and white subject. And now we're going to Modesto, and Sherry McIntyre, who happens to be here. And this is her classroom, which I just want to say something about the windowsill, which you'll read about in the book, that immediately caught my attention when I walked in the classroom, because very rarely do you walk in a public school classroom and see window shelves with objects from, like 6 to 10, is it a dozen religions? Sikhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, I'm probably missing some. And that just stuck with me like months after I visited her class. And then a few asides about Modesto. Modesto is the one place where I went that's never had a controversy over their religion course. And the reason is, I think, well, first of all, let me just say that people hold it up as a national model. It's the only place that we know in the country, when I say we, like I talked to First Amendment Center experts and others, where they actually require every high school student to take a world religions course before they graduate. And so far I haven't found any place else in the country where they require them to take a separate course. And it's a 9-week class, and they cover 6 to 10 religions, which is very different than what Wellesley does with its 6th graders. And the idea is really exposure. And a couple of the things that they don't do, no field trips, no guest speakers, no trying on things. And I didn't get, Sherry will nod or disagree, some teachers are more willing to have debate than others. Yes, okay. Interesting to have my source right here in front of me. And I want to read a little bit from Sherry here. Sherry McIntyre taught the same class 5 times a day to roughly 40 students at a time. Most were freshmen. Some were upperclassmen who'd either flunked the course previously or didn't take it in 9th grade for some reason. RESPECT, Aretha Franklin sang from McIntyre's computer stereo as students walked into their first world religions class of the unit in the fall of 2013. I sat toward the back as McIntyre used most of the first class to set ground rules for discussion. She coached students how to ask questions in a class where it's easy to offend. The wrong way to ask a question is, well, that's really stupid. Why do people believe that? A better way to word it would be, wow, that's really interesting, said McIntyre. She emphasized the delicacy of the subject matter. This is a world religions class, she said. There are wars fought over this stuff. No controversy, I said, has ever arisen out of the course. And I want to read just a little bit of this tiny section because I haven't talked about what students think they get out of this. So, what they believe is the students enter world history classes better prepared. Teachers no longer have to backtrack and explain the religious background of Gandhi, for example. Students at least know what it means when someone says nirvana or karma or refers to a Sikh turban. McIntyre believes the course makes a difference based on anecdotal accounts. And she told me this story like 3 years ago. She was buying mattresses, and this former student, she's smiling, and a former student was working at the store. He immediately wanted to tell the teacher how her class had made a difference. And he recalled how he was at a family gathering, and someone just made a stereotypical comment about Hindus. So this kid stood up and he told that person, "You're wrong." And McIntyre had encouraged him and his classmates to always stand up for the rights of the smallest groups. And the young man remembered that, and this was like, 3 years after the course. Yes. A big question that I ask in the book, or I think that comes up, is can education reduce bullying? And what you're looking at here is a slide of a Sikh religious school. So no, this is not a public school class, but I'm showing you this because I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Sikhs. And the turban is what the adults wear, and then if you look at the head coverings of the kids. And I spent an entire day at the Sikh temple talking to young kids and teachers, and I wanted to get a sense about what's it like for you. And I heard there and later at other places many, many stories about how they get teased and how they get bullied, and very brutal bullying, and how they get picked, and people mistake them for Muslim and say the same things that they say to Muslims. The same thing, by the way, happens to Hindus as well. But just some really nasty stuff. And I'm going to read to you this one little anecdote that's from a guy named Bhupinder Pada, and he's now 24 years old, and he still remembers what happened to him when he was in kindergarten. Having the class at the high school level didn't prevent problems for the youngest Sikhs. Bhupinder Pada started kindergarten in Modesto schools wearing a patka, a mini turban, over his uncut hair. After 1 year, he stopped wearing it and demanded to have his hair cut because so many of his classmates made fun of him, and he already felt like an outcast. He told me, by the way, that they would tear it off and throw it. Though Bhupinder was born in the United States, his parents had spoken only Punjabi to him since birth. His father, an operations supervisor at the Gallo winery, and mother had come to the United States in 1990. Bhupinder could say only his name, his birthday, and a few other words in English when he started school. Worse, the boy who would grow to be 6 feet 4 inches as an adult was the tallest child in his kindergarten class. As I met with Bhupinder and his parents one evening in their living room, his mother remembered how she cried over her son's pain and his decision not to wear the padka. She didn't want her son teased, but she also wanted him to stick to his faith's traditions. That his son no longer felt comfortable wearing the padka hurt Bhupinder's father, but he understood. When Bhupinder's father came to the United States, he cut his hair that same year and stopped wearing a turban except at temple. There were fewer Sikhs in Modesto back then, and he thought he might not get a job if he looked too different. Bhupinder took the World Religions course in 2005. Did the course make a difference, I asked? He said yes and no. Yes, because he learned about other religions, but no, because he could hear snickering when the students watched a video about India and its religions. Friends sometimes were curious and asked him questions about Sikhism, but all Bhupinder wanted to do was avoid the situation. He didn't want to stand out as different, and the course highlighted religious differences. His father, though, remembered something positive from the course. One day his son came home from school and announced, "Hey, Dad, at least now these kids know who I am." So the father really disagreed and said it made a difference. This last section I'm partly including, and I'm not sure where Simon is, because my son asked me very early on, see over here? Okay. My son asked me very early on, "Mom, would you read me a section of the book?" And I kind of struggled because it's not a book for 7-year-olds. But there was a story in there that I thought he could connect to. And it was the story of these two young women, Katie and Hepa. And I'm going to read you first a little bit about Hepa to try and kind of take you in what it's like to be a Muslim student in America's schools today. And then you'll learn a little bit more about this really cool friendship. Let's see, hold on. Oops. Okay. And her name is Hepa Hussein, which is kind of key to the first part I'm going to read. Hepa was born in Tampa and identified herself as Palestinian American. Her family originally came from the Palestinian territories, but left because of the Israeli occupation of their homes, she said. Hepa beamed as soon as she met me, saying she was excited because no one had asked to hear her story before. She talked about going on errands with her mother, who wears a hijab, and getting looks from strangers as if mother and daughter were outsiders. Hepa, though her father would like her to, had not committed to covering her long black curly hair. She told her father to let her finish high school first and then she would be stricter. She was unsure how her friends would treat her if she started wearing a hijab. For her, issues began in the 6th grade, on the first day of middle school, when a boy in geography class poked fun at her last name. "Oh, is your dad Saddam Hussein? Are you going to bomb a building?" the boy said. Hepa sat in silence for a moment, then said, "Shut up." She spoke with her father about it after school, and he advised her to first deal with it on her own and tell the boy to back off. If the boy persisted, he said, then involve the teacher. The boy teased her 2 more times in the same way. So Hepa told the teacher, who put a stop to it. Such incidents made her stronger and more determined to learn as much as she could about her religion, so she could answer other students' questions correctly and confidently. She saw herself as setting an example for her peers of what a Muslim was. She prayed 5 times a day, fitting in prayer before and after school. And then there's this story of Hepa and Katie, and I got to go with them on the field trip. I remember asking my editor, "Is it okay to do this? They're inviting me to go to Epcot." And I think the decision was yes. This would give me the inside scoop. And I interviewed kids on the bus ride from Tampa to Epcot. It was about an hour and a half each way. And I talked to Hepa on the way down, and then she let me shadow her and Katie, who is Jewish, as they did their class project and then toured Morocco, the fake Morocco in Epcot. Katie and Hepa, who had 2 classes together, met at the start of the school year and became friends. And with Hepa assuming the role of tour guide, the girls walked on to Morocco. Katie, who is Jewish, could relate to her Muslim friend's story about what it was like to be in the religious minority at Steinbrenner. In 8th grade, some peers made a crack about Jews and money when she dropped a penny. Katie grew up in a family well aware of the worst of anti-Semitism. Her grandfather fled Germany as a child during the Holocaust. Katie became Hepa's enthusiastic student as the pair walked through Disney's Morocco. Hepa pointed at the geometric designs in a building and noted they were common on mosques as well as other buildings in the Middle East. They entered the exhibit's bazaar, and Hepa became giddy with excitement at the sight of shops that resembled markets in the Palestinian territories. And at one point, she did what you can see in this slide here. It's a package of za'atar, which is a spice. And so she showed Katie this package of za'atar, a spice her aunt and grandmother make from scratch from their herb garden in Jordan. They dip bread in olive oil with the spice and eat it at breakfast. Back in another Moroccan shop, Hepa greeted the sales clerks in Arabic and asked them questions about Morocco because she'd never been there. Then another Epcot visitor walked up and asked the clerks in English, "Is Morocco the one that has the magic carpet?" After the women walked away, the pair of teens rolled their eyes. Of all the questions one could ask about Morocco, asking about something connected to the movie Aladdin seemed lame. Then again, it was Disney World. And I show you this picture because afterwards they just enjoyed Disney World like two teenagers and did selfies in every shop. And as I'm not showing you all of the photos as a courtesy, but I sent them the photos. And I asked them, why are you so comfortable with each other? Does it have to do with the religion class? What does it have to do with? And they said, well, Katie thought that she would not have felt comfortable asking Hepa so many questions about Islam if they hadn't become friends. So they're not sure about how much a different, they don't have a full course on religion. They learn about religion a little bit as a part of world history in their school. And what they said to me was they really wish that their school had started teaching about world religions much earlier, because they think if that had happened, then this bullying might not have, the kind of things that happened to them, maybe it wouldn't have been quite as bad. And I'm going to end with this slide because what they're talking about actually is possible, and you can read more about it in chapter 4, which is called How Young is Too Young. And on that note, I'm going to end and would welcome questions if there's time for questions. Thank you. He's wondering whether in any of the classes people actually attempt to kind of just talk about religion and how, right, and how we just get to religion.
Well, why it is as
why as society we have religion?
Why as society, why as human beings, regardless of our culture?
Yes.
History.
Okay, so the answer to that question, if I were to say it really briefly, is yes. The longer answer is that in every class I saw, they do spend some time talking about, societies have reached for religion since the beginning of time to try and I think the passage from Adam Bloomer gets at a little bit. How do we explain the inexplicable, right? So that's partly where religion comes from. And in this class right here, in fact, I listened as she kind of said, well, here's what religion is. It's sort of like our quest for answers like, how we came to be. And they actually do a unit about Mesopotamia before they start studying religion. And so they really learn some of the early versions of religion before they start getting to the monotheistic religions. So yes, that every class I went to, they do attempt to talk about, do they have huge philosophical discussions? No, but they touch on it. The question was, do any of the classes talk about people who don't believe in religion? And the answer to that is also yes, they do. Do they talk about that a lot? No. But sitting in the Modesto class, I remember seeing an example of a case about a girl who was atheist, who objected to a prayer banner in her high school. And I sat in the beginning of the world religion class in Modesto, and as a part of that, they do define what is an atheist, what is an agnostic. And in Wellesley too, they've talked about that. In the first grade classes that I went to, I don't know if they got into that so much. I think that is sort of like the next frontier. They talk about it, they don't spend a lot of time talking about it. And given that, I don't want to cite the wrong statistic, but given that a huge number of Americans, an increasing number, identify themselves as nuns, like people who don't believe in any religion, I think it's something schools are going to need to grapple with. Like how can we include that more when we are doing these classes about religion? Because it's, is secular humanism a religion? These are questions that I think in the high school level in particular you could talk about. So the question is, he's talking about Texas, where they very much have wanted to keep Christianity in front and center in many of the schools. And had they been able to sort of be objective in a sense, right, and teach about many religions without putting a value on it. I think the teachers that I have seen for the most part are doing that. So I didn't see every teacher in this country. I've also still heard examples of teachers like, I don't remember which town this was. It wasn't one I saw, but I wrote an op-ed about this at one point. Teacher hung a Jesus sign above her school, above her classroom. So there's still like violations of separation of church and state are still happening, and they'll always happen. But the people who are teaching about religion, for the most part, when I've talked to them, they are trying to keep their own beliefs out of it. And an interesting thing that I found, though, is there doesn't seem to be a uniform policy on how to deal with it. Like, some teachers are very open, I'm Jewish, and I just want you to know that. That's it. Some teachers pride themselves on never saying what they are, and then they make a game of it and have the teachers guess what they are at the end, because they really don't want to show bias. And I mean, I can't say in Texas, the woman in the photo that I showed earlier actually was Jewish. So she definitely didn't have a propensity towards Islam over Christianity over Judaism. So yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's one, I want to talk just another little second about that one, because it came up big time in the How Young is Too Young chapter. Because those teachers, unlike middle school teachers and high school teachers, don't really take a lot of classes about religion in college. They were kind of thrown, a lot of them were thrown into this, and they don't get any training on how to teach about religion. And there was, Wichita, Kansas is a part of the Bible Belt. So there were teachers who still want to celebrate Christmas in the classroom and still want to do celebration versus education. And the principal's saying, no, you can't do that. So I think we are so much better than we were in the 1970s when the church lady came into my classroom. But we still have a ways to go. Okay, I love that question. He's wondering, is a student who comes into this class and they believe that their religion is the only way, is the true way, are they respected in these classes? So one thing is, teachers do not out anyone. So unless that student self-identifies themselves, no one has any way of knowing that they feel that way. What I liked, I think I read a passage, was it Sherry, who said, be careful how you talk about things. You know, instead of saying, oh, I can't believe you believe that, you can say, well, that's interesting, or something like that. So what I noticed in the middle school and high school level in particular, the teachers are pretty good about coaching on how do you talk about religion with each other so you don't offend each other. And I've also noticed teachers stepping in if they think a conversation's going in a bad direction. So I think some of those, and I did talk to a number of students, and a lot of them keep that to themselves. You know, they don't necessarily reveal how religious they are. And I think, I don't know if it was, might have been Modesto, where some students said, well, it wasn't cool to be too religious, so they don't wear it on their sleeve. You know, it just depends on where they are, too. Things vary widely by community.
Thank you for everything you did, all the research and the stories that you're able to tell now because of the travels that you had. And what I'm wondering is, did you get a sense of the future of how this type of education is growing, or if it's limited, or is this something that you could see as becoming more standard or special just to different communities?
So I think like one of the main reasons I wrote the book is I don't think it's growing enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I interviewed a number of education researchers who've studied this much longer than I have, and one of them described it to me as a free-for-all movement. You know, you have like Tony Blair, and I don't think I even mentioned him in the book, with the Faith to Faith Foundation, and they do these virtual meetups with kids, and it's a great program, but it's not a curriculum, it's not, it's sort of an extra. And then you have Modesto, and Modesto has been trying for years. Modesto's thought was, well, other people will replicate us, and it was only last year that the state legislature passed a resolution, right? I mean, this happened on deadline with the book. They passed a resolution saying, this is a great model, but I don't think there's any rush to replicate it. So I think a big point in the book is that we do need to do more. We need to have a conversation about this, because there are some really wonderful examples out there. There's not enough of it. I think there's more of a need now to do more. We're certainly doing more now than we did in the 70s, than we did in the 80s. I mean, a lot of these things I'm talking about only came about in the late 90s and 2000s. So in that respect, yes, there is more now than we've ever had in the past, but it's still kind of scattershot. It's not, there's no one, you know, at the education department levels, at states or national, saying we really need to address this. And, you know, the one thing I will add on that, though, in the late 90s and early 2000s, as part of state standards, most states said, when we are teaching about world history and geography, we do need to teach about the world's religions. But that's not the same thing as what I really saw in Wellesley and what I saw in Modesto. So, thank you. Okay.
Writing needs us more than we need it. Like chess, neoclassical architecture, and religion, it is a thing that feeds on consciousness. It requires the human mind in order to survive and propagate.